はい、こんにちは。ニコニコ動画の皆さんと YouTube の皆さん、アキエです。今回も Amazon プライムが作っているロード・オブ・ザ・リング力の指輪シリーズ、なぜこのシリーズが海外で炎上しているかという動画シリーズを今回はパート2を作っているので、いろいろ話さないといけない話題があるので、早速始めましょうね。あとちなみに、今の批評の数字は、3ミリオンになった今回。まずはね、原因となっているところを先に見ましょうね。もちろん、トレーラーだけを見て、ティザーの画像だけを見て、トルキの大ファンが怒った人もいるんですけど、やっぱり、炎上してる原因、怒っている原因は、多分ある記事じゃないかな。で、こちらはその記事なんです。Vanity Fair というサイトのハリウッドのニュースサイトなのかな。で、このサイトが出した力の指輪の記事なんですけど、この記事にいろいろ番組を作ってる人の意見とか、何々しますとかそういう話があったので、キャラはこうなってますとかそういう話がたくさん、あったので、インタビューとかでね、この記事を読んだ人は、トルキンのファンが読んだら結構、怒る、なんていうか怒ってもおかしくないぐらいとなるところが結構書いてあるので、なんかちょっと心配しちゃうような内容が結構あるみたいんだけど、その話は、私は記事を詳しく読まないけど、なぜかというと、私は他人の動画を使うつもりなので、彼らはもっと細かくこの記事を見てるので、今のところは、こういう記事があるんですよと、こういう見た目をしてるとかそういうね。あとこのサイトも確かティザーの画像を出したサイトなので、だからこのサイトで初めて、Amazon からの映像とかそういうティザーの画像とか見ることができたので、この記事が原因なんですねみんなが怒ってる理由とかで、もちろんその記事にいろんな話題があるので、一つの動画で、今回の動画で多分1時間以上になるんですけどそれでも時間が足りないぐらい結構いろんな話題があるんだから、で他人の動画を翻訳したりするつもりなので、自分では細かく話さないけど、それぞれのテーマとか話題について、話す動画を使うので今回の動画では全部入れないから多分たくさん動画編集しないといけないんでしょうね。ほとんどの、見せたい動画は多分私の動画の最後の方につけると思いますので、あとあくまで批判してる人の意見なんだから、この番組を見て、ポジティブな思いをしてる人の意見ではない、あくまで批判してる人の意見です楽しみに待つ理由は、説明するまでもないんでしょうねだから批判してる人の動画とか意見のそれについて話します。あとね、今回の動画で話さない話題についても、その人たちの動画にそういう話をしてるかもしれないけど、そういういろんな話題がちょっとごちゃ混ぜになってる感じがするかもしれないけど、今回の動画で絶対時間が足りないんだから、後の動画でそういう話題について話すけど、話さないといけない話題が多すぎて今日は少しだけね、今日集中してない話題についてそういう話をするかもしれないね、そういう動画に。とにかく今日の話題はこれなんですね。脚本家やショーランナー、つまり番組を作ってる人たちのことですね。で、次はトム・シッピーさん、世界の一番有名なトルキン専門家なんですね。で、次の話題は、別の人たちに対して言ってるんですけど、トルキンの専門家ですかとか、本当にトルキンの専門家なのかな次は、何々さん、誰かさんが死んだ日にそして最後はトルキンに書けなかった小説を書けるのか、誰かさんが言ったことなんですけど、つまり Amazon の傲慢な態度 の話題ですね。順番通りに並べてないかもしれないけど、今日はこの話題について話します。まずは、脚本家とかショーランナーのことね。ショーランナー、リードしてる2人の脚本家かな。この2人はパトリック、なんていうか、マッケイマッケイかな、そしてジョン・ディ・ペインさんですね。この2人がメインの脚本家とかショーランナーなんですね。この2人の問題はちょっとね、脚本家として未熟で職歴がほとんどないからちょっとねアマゾンはね10億ドルをかけてるから、それぐらいお金がかかってる番組にね、その未熟の人に任すのはどうでしょうかね。こういうところはちょっと心配するよね。この2人がクレジット、そういうエンドクレジットとかそういうクレジットで認められたっていうかなんていうかその名前がクレジットに出たのはスタートレックビヨンドだけとか聞いたんだけどそういう話があったんですけど、初めて IMDB に載った時は力の指輪だからなんかこれはどうかな、よくないねそんな話を聞くと結構次はクビにされた脚本家とかトルキンの専門家とかそういう話ね。まずはトム・シピさんは世界中で最も知られているトルキンの専門家で、最もファンに信頼されているトルキンの専門家なんですけど、彼が番組と関わっているとファンにちょっとそういう安心感をそれを感じる安心感があるから、トム・シピが一緒に働いていると聞いたら、ファンがホッとしたんでしょうね。トムがいるなら大丈夫ですねと。そうだったんだけど、ある日ね、トム・シッピーさんは、最初は力の指輪の番組と関わっていたんですけど、アマゾンにクビにされたという噂があったんだから、ファンがさらに心配するね、出来事が増えたんですね。まずは2020年3月3日に TheOneLink.net という、ファンサイトみたいなグループとかそういうグループがね、トム・シピさんはクビにされたという噂を聞いて、で彼だけではなく脚本を書いてるスタッフも全員クビにされたという噂が、そういう情報が入ったらしい。あと俳優も数人クビにされたと、そういう噂があったよね。多分ここで動画の映像を見せるけどこちらです。
We have a cast of relatively unknowns that are true
relative unknowns
that have a good reputation on stage, on screen, in theater.
You could say that the largest name, or the most recognizable name, includes a couple of Game of Thrones actors, but the most recognizable person who was part of the cast is already gone and has left the cast. And so we have these new actors, and we have leaked script material from the auditions. We actually have leaked audition tapes.
Those are
that we had.
Audition scripts may not be representative, but I'm going to let you set up this board game.
Oh yeah, I'm going to set this up in 2 seconds.
But
I'm adding that to the list of amazing things that we've been reporting on.
Yes.
We have been reporting on that. Every little thing that comes our way, theonering.net is so happy to bring back to you.
We hear a lot of
we're here for.
We hear a lot of whispers on the air, and we don't report on everything because we can't validate everything. There's a bunch of people that just are in it for the clout, Twitter accounts that DM us and Instagram accounts that say, hey, this is happening, I thought you should know, but if no one else can back it up, then it's no point in making fake news all over again.
Well,
we try to wait until we hear it from multiple people, and that's how we've always operated. You validate everything you hear. And as of today, we've heard from multiple sources, and based on our own research of looking into Twitter accounts, IMDb accounts, and everything like that, Amazon has let go of the entire writer's room for Lord of the Rings.
What?
Everyone's gone. Their plan is to bring in a whole new writing team for season 2.
Freaking kidding me?
Right now, as we speak today, as they film this, season 1 is on hiatus. They are not filming season 1. They are filming a pilot that may or may not.
I thought they were filming maybe 2 episodes.
Maybe 2 episodes,
we had reported
but
maybe
they're
one?
not shooting season 1. It's officially on hiatus. The writing team for season 1 has let go, and Amazon is actively looking for new writers to join a brand new writing room for season 2.
They've let the writers go.
And we've been talking about this for the last...
They're launching a $1 billion Lord of the Rings TV series set in Middle-earth, and all their writers, they just let them all go?
That's right.
What?
Here's the thing, is that we're finding it out now that whatever has happened with the scripts for season 1 of Lord of the Rings, those scripts are in cold storage. The season 1 is on hiatus, and as far as we've heard, they're looking for an entire new writing team for season 2.
This explains, perhaps, the reason why one of the lead writers on the series was on Twitter two weeks ago, or something like that, begging for a job with a video game adaptation. When we were
not begging,
actually playfully saying, "Hire me, guys." I don't mean that. I mean like playfully saying.
I think
she was like, "Yeah, hey, you know." She actually was on Twitter saying, when we assumed she was on a 5-season commitment,
right?
Then all of a sudden, one of their lead writers from Lord of the Rings is on Twitter saying,
I got time to work on something.
I'd love to go work on something else. That'd be great. So, I mean, being solicitous of getting that position of writing for another video game movie. And that is now answered. That is now a puzzle piece that I didn't understand, that I now comprehend better in context.
If you look at
this is shocking.
Any of the writers that have social media,
this is shocking.
While they were writing Lord of the Rings,
Very
were
shocking.
obviously very off of Twitter. They weren't posting anything, but a lot of them have had a ton of time in the last 3 months, and they're on Twitter every day, 10 posts every day, being a part of the conversation, as a lot of us are, the society conversation. So this is a big red flag that the writers are gone and they're not in New Zealand doing script revisions and making the pilot the best it can.
They're making this situation go from strange to even far, far weirder, that they have fired all of their writers. Does that also mean, please clarify for me, good sir, that J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, the original 2 showrunners, are also off the job?
They're still on.
Who else is fired off the job? What's going on over there?
J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay are still show running the show.
Okay, wow.
But now it's interesting because the writers that they let go have come from shows like Breaking Bad and Hannibal and Fringe, and have worked with many of our Lord of the Rings actors on other shows. All of those people are gone, but Patrick and J.D. are still show running it, and they have 0 production experience. 0. That's a big 0.
This is intriguing.
They have never had a script produced. They have never made a movie or a TV show. But Cliff, that's not the only bad news. Not only are the writers gone,
why is this?
Shippy is officially off the project.
What happened? Where? What? What have you been hearing?
He's gone. He's done with the project.
Tolkien scholar who wrote Author of the Century, Tom Shippey,
yes,
universally embraced and admired Tolkien scholar, who is on the most wonderful level of reaching out to fans at conventions and has the most wonderful style with his erudition on Tolkien.
And he was
You're telling me he's off the project?
A linchpin for the fan community to say this show is in good hands. He was the anchor, the rock that comforted fans And when they announced the show, they said, you know what? As long as they've got Shippy and John Howe, we're in good hands.
All the fans
those
have
hands
been saying that.
are gone.
How do you know this?
Those hands are gone. Shippy has
Really?
gone to a couple events and has confirmed that his role with Lord of the Rings was no longer required, and he's off the project. And we are hearing that more people that were in that video are off the project, but until I get confirmation from any of them that they're officially off, like, I'm not going to name any more names, but all I'm saying is that video of the creative team that we saw, half of them are gone.
Look at it. Maybe there's another way to look at this.
People in the chat room are asking,
I don't know how else to look at this.
What are your sources? What are you hearing? So
okay,
we have heard,
what are your
heard
sources?
from
I want to ask
multiple people that their jobs are at risk. Amazon is a big, powerful company.
Yeah.
So we've heard from multiple people who don't know each other and don't know that they're talking, saying the same things. But if you go and look at all the news articles over the last 3 months, look at key phrases that have been announced. When Amazon in December said they have greenlit season 2, at the bottom of that press release, it says season 1 is officially on hiatus. So Amazon has been telling us this, but it's never, all the pieces have been intentionally placed different ways, so the whole picture is not put together. And
until you look at it with some additional information.
Kim Rudolph in the chat room says pilot episodes are often scrapped if the studio doesn't like it and the show is forced to refilm. This is not a new thing. Star Trek, Game of Thrones. That's not what I'm worried about. So Kim, what are you worried about? Let me put it in the chat. Give us a text. What are you worried about if that's not what you're worried about? Because, again, I'm not worried about it. Like, if they don't like the scripts...
You're not worried about it. You're not worried about all this stuff?
Nick in the chat room
says... What's going on with the people leaving the production?
I highly doubt this thing is going to be amazing without Tom Shippey. Like, the man is perfect.
Tom Shippey to be lost off of this project and the writers to be gone and going from a full season to only 2 episodes. And now you're telling me there's only going to be maybe this one that might just be trashed, a pilot that is shelved away.
A camera test.
What is this? That's a very, very, very expensive camera test. And I must say it represents, at least, if not something worrisome, it is a troubling waste of resources and time because this is unexpected.
I disagree.
This is all unexpected.
So Kim in the chat room says, I'm worried about Amazon running out of time and pushing out a crappy show in order to retain the rights. And I'm worried about them firing Tom Shippey because it means they might be drifting further from Tolkien's vision.
Yeah.
That sums up the concerns of the majority of fans.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree with that 100%.
それはあくまで噂なんですけど、コーリー・オルセンという、トルキンの作品に詳しい人らしい。で、彼も、トム・シッピさんと話したらしいけど、彼もトム・シッピさんはクビにされたと、少なくとももう番組と関わっていないと、そういう意見を持っていた。で、それは2020年4月7日だった。
Sorry, Edith, I am reading your question and trying to think of what I can say. She said, I heard the Amazon series fired Tom Shippey. Is that true? Sorry, it's hard because I've talked to Tom, but I know that he would not want me to reveal most of the things that he told me, so I can't really comment on it. I will say it's not that simple. I don't think that that's exactly what happened like that. Like they just up and fired Tom Shippey. I'm pretty sure not what occurred there. Yeah. Sorry, I can't really say it. I'm trying to figure out what I'm like, no, I can't safely. I don't think I can safely say anything about that. So I will confine myself to saying it's certainly not that simple. Is he still involved? I don't believe so. I don't believe so. I am not 100% sure if that is a permanent state of affairs, but I do not believe that he is involved as of right now.
でそれを聞くとさすがにトルキンのファンがちょっと心配するよね。で脚本家もクビにされたということは、多分ストーリーがちょっとめちゃくちゃになるとかそういう心配とか、トム・シピさんはクビにされたということはトルキンのファンにとって Amazon を信頼する理由はなくなった。Amazon がトルキンが作った原作に忠実ねしないとか、そういう恐れがあるよね。でそれだけでも結構悪い状況なんですけど、ただの偶然かもしれないけど、これ以上にさらに悪いことがあるんですね。で見せた動画に TheOneLink.net の動画ね、その動画の人が3ヶ月前からの記事とかそういう話をしていたんですね。で3ヶ月前からシーズン1は中止になっていたということは、おそらくその時ぐらいに脚本家とか俳優がクビにされたんじゃない？でもちろんシピさんもクビにされたんですけど、おそらくその3ヶ月以内のところにもう関わっていなくなったよね。そういう人たちがね、そういうスタッフのみんなが、みんなというわけじゃないけど、でその動画は、2020年3月3日にアップされたので、3月3日の3ヶ月前は、おそらく12月とか1月ぐらい、そのあたりでみんながクビにされたんじゃないかな。で今の話は、そんなに関係ない話と思ってるかもしれないけど、何の関係があるの？そういうクビにされた時期とか、そういうなんで大事なのと、思ってるでしょうけど、その3日前から12月から3月以内になんか重要な出来事があったのと皆さんに聞いてみたい。その時期で重要な何かが起きなかったっけ？それは何なのかというと、作者の息子であるクリストファー・トルキンが2020年1月16日にお亡くなりになりましたね。死んでしまいました。ただの偶然かもしれないけど、わざとだったのかわからないけど、ただの偶然だったのかわからないけど、そう見ると、ファンがそう見るとねまるで Amazon が彼がくたばってくれるまで待っていたような、で彼が死んだ後に全部変えたとか、そういう印象なんだ。彼が死んでいればやりたい放題できるんですね。ちょうどいいタイミングですね本当かどうかはわからないけど、ちょっと陰謀説に聞こえるかもしれないけど、少なくともファンの視点から見るとそういうイメージになってしまうんでしょちょうどいいタイミングでスタッフがキャストが変わったんですね、なんという偶然ですねとかなんちゅうタイミングでキャストが変わったとか脚本を書いてる人がクビになったとか、トム・シッピがクビにされたとかちょうどいいタイミングなんですね。でそれを聞くと、これだけでも結構悪い状況なんですね。さっき同じこと言ったんですけど、でクリストファー・トルキンが死んだ日にクビにされた可能性はあるとか、同じ日かどうかは分からないけど、彼が死んだ直後にね全部変わったで、その状況は前に言った悪い状況よりもさらに悪い状況なんですけど、このさらに悪い状況以上にもさらに悪い状況があって、もうファンがぶち切れてもおかしくないそのクリストファー・トルキンにまるで侮辱してるイメージ以上にさらに悪い状況で、そのクリストファー・トーキンは、一生かけて父親の作品をできるだけ守ろうとしたんだ。でファンのみんなに世界一の素晴らしい息子と言われていたらしいけど、確かにそうなんですよねクリストファーは理想の息子ですねその父さんの作品を守っていた、番人である存在のクリストファー・トルキンが、死んだ日に、全部変えるとか、そういうすでに悪い状況以上に力の指輪は何日に放送をし始めるのか知ってるのか、今では 予定は2022年9月2日なんですけど、でトレーラーで見れる通り9月2日に放送しますとか、そういう宣伝してるんですね。で9月2日に重要な出来事があったんですよね。何が起きたんでしたっけ？ 9 月2日に。そう、作者である J.R.R. トルキンが死んでしまった日なんですね。彼が1973年9月2日に、死んだらしいですね。もちろんただの偶然かもしれないけど、なんだかねこれは無事切れてもわかるよねもちろんただの偶然かもしれないけど、わざとやっているのならば、これはトールキンファンにとって最大の侮辱であるその親子揃って2人とも死んだ日になんちゅう無礼なことをやってるこれは怒られて当然だよね。とにかく次の話題はトルキンの専門家はてなについて話します。世界で最も信頼されているトルキン専門家のトム・シピさんをクビにした以来、アマゾンはどのトルキン専門家と一緒に働いているのか全く発表していなかった。世界一の専門家をクビにして代わり者は誰なんだ？その世界で最も優秀な専門家がいなくなるとそれ以上のものはいないから、誰を雇ったのか、もしかして誰も雇ってないのかという、発表しないならファンが勝手に妄想するでしょ。さっき見せたバニティフェアの記事に、あるトールキンの専門家とインタビューをしたらしいけど、彼女は結構なんていうか、多分作者の意見と全然違うタイプなんでしょうけど、彼女は別に番組と関わっていないと思うんですけど、ただその記事とインタビューをしただけなんですけど、アマゾンが世界一の専門家をクビにしたから、代わり者は誰なのか全くわからない状況なんだから、その記事のインタビューを、インタビューじゃないけど彼女の一言を見て、彼女が番組と関わっていると、勘違いしてる人が結構多いんじゃないかな。私が見た動画でいろんな人が、彼女が Amazon と一緒に働いていると思ってる人も結構いたんだから、そういうね。で彼女以外にも他の、トルキン専門家と、自分のことをトルキンの専門家と呼んでる人も、いるんですけど、でその人たちは別に番組と関わっていないけど、トルキンの作品について、ソーシャルメディアで話していたんですけど、彼女も含めてなんですけど、自分のことを専門家と呼んでる人たちは基本的なものを間違っている場合が多かったので、そういうファンが正しい情報を言っていて、お前何言ってんだ、間違ってんじゃねえかとかそういう専門家たちが結構間違いばかりしていて、でさらにファンはその人たちは番組と関わっている可能性はあると、少なくとも数人ぐらいはいるんでしょうけど、で結構炎上状態、そういうファンに叩かれて、どう考えてもお前間違ってるだろうか本を読みなさいとか、そういうで、さっき話した、専門家のことなんですけど、彼女はトルキンの作品にそういう原作に忠実タイプではなく、自分なりの自分の意見を勝手にストーリーに入れるとか、そういうタイプなんですね。だからファンに怒られていたんだよね。例えばね、そのティーザーの画像で人種が変えられたドワーフとかエルフを見て、ファンがそれを見て、さすがに怒ったんですけど、でそれに対して、彼女はねこういう風なことを言ったみたいですね。マリアナさんらしいですね、彼女の名前は。番組と関わっていないみたいですね。で彼女は、その批判してるファンを、なんていうかバカにしてるっていうか、なんでエルフが黒人とか、ヒスパニック系とかアジア人であるのを見ると、なんでそんなに怒るのかと、そういう、つまりファンのみんなイコール人種差別者という、印象をつけるような ことを言ってるんだよね。ストーリーもわからないのに、なんでそんなに黒人のエルフを見ると怒るのかと、分かってないみたいですね。この話は多分別の動画で話しますけど、そういう今回は、あくまで脚本家とかそういう話をするんだけど、専門家とかで、そういう人みたいですね。じゃあ次の話題ですね。その記事にショーランナーの、マッケイさんからかな。で、その番組を作ってる最中に一番疑問になっている、疑問っていうか一番モチベーションになっていた言葉がこれなんですね。我々にはトルキンが書かなかった小説を書けるのか、そしてそれを大イベントのシリーズとして作れるのかという、それを見るとそんなに悪くないように聞こえるかもしれないけど、挑戦しようとしてるという、印象はあるかもしれないけど、ちょっと英語では少しなんていうか、トルキンに書けなかった小説を書けるのかとか、そういう印象になるんですけど、ちょっとなんか偉い態度みたいな私が見た、いろんな人の動画を見て、みんながちょっとこの一言を読んで、結構こいつら偉い態度、傲慢な態度をしてるとちょっとそういう印象があったんだ、英語では。で、ほとんどのファンとかファンでない人でもそれを見たら、お前に書けねえだろトルキンは一生かけて作ったストーリーなんだから。で、それ以上に彼は正しく言えてるかどうかはわからないけど、英語ではフィロロジーとかフィロロジストなんですけど、そういう文献学者とか白言学者、つまり、言葉のエキスパートだったんだよね。トルキンさんは言葉の専門家だった。で、もちろん彼は、一生かけてストーリーを作ったんですけど、なんていうか、ファンにとってその発言を見たら、まるでショーランナーたちはトルキンは一生かけてストーリーを作ったのに、こいつらが数年以内でトルキン以上に紙作品を作れると思ってる傲慢とか、そういう偉い態度が本当に嫌いだったみんな何様と反応していたんだアマゾンがお金をかかった同人誌を作ってるとか、そういうただの同人誌じゃないかとか、結構そういうコメントをたくさん見たんだけど基本的にファンが怒ってる理由は、アマゾンとこの番組を作ってる人たちは原作を完全に無視してるから、原作を尊重してない、ファンを尊重してない、そしてもちろん作者である JRR トーキンも尊重してないから怒ってる。絶対作者が望まないことをやってるからファンが激怒基本的にそういう話なんだから、今日は多分これぐらいで私の話パートが終わるんですけど、多分これからは他人の動画のシーンを使ってそういう翻訳する、私よりうまく説明できている人とか、私ができるだけ冷静に説明してみたんですけど、やっぱり海外の人、欧米の人にとって結構、感情的になるようなものだから、日本人はもうちょっとこういう冷静な説明の方が好きと思うんですけど、欧米の人にとってこういう印象なんだから、やっぱり力の指輪を検索して探せる動画のシーンを使って、そういう、欧米ではこういう印象なんだとちょっと見せてみたいと思います。あとはもちろん私に話せなかったこととか、うまく表現できないとか、とにかく私の話パートが終わって、これからは、皆さんの動画を見せます。面白いと思ったら概要欄にリンクを貼るので、ぜひ面白いと思った動画のリンクをクリックして、その人の評価ボタンをクリックしてください。よろしくお願いします。それじゃあ皆さんの動画をお見せしましょう。
Yeah, I don't have any issues with any of this so far. I mean, like most of the things that I have issues with, we'll talk about when we get to the Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair, okay.
Where it's the first look at things. Look, we've got two fairly inexperienced writers who really don't have any head writing credits of their own. The only reason they got this job is because J.J. Abrams told Amazon to hire them, and J.J. Abrams has had some successes, but he's also fucked some shit up that I will never forgive him for.
I found out who is in charge of this, okay? just as Tolkien entrusted to Frodo and Samwise two unlikely newcomers, McKay and Payne, high school friends from Northern Virginia who have been writing in Hollywood for 13 years, but The Rings of Power is their first credited IMDb listing. You just gave more than $1 billion franchise to two unknowns.
But they've been writing in Hollywood together. Like in the location, not for Hollywood, just in Hollywood.
We're passionate about the material and had a take that matched Amazon's appetites and ambitions. See? So Amazon has an appetite and ambition, perhaps an agenda, and these guys are willing to do whatever to match that, especially when they don't have credits to their own, where it's like in Hollywood, in order to have your vision done the way you want, you have to have the pedigree and you have to say, fuck off, this is what I've done. Otherwise, more than likely, you're going to be constantly compromising your ambition to keep your position, to make the studios happy. So that's a danger. Danger number one, they're unknowns that are happy to capitulate, all right? And do they have the correct vision for it, right? Now, worry number two is they fired a resident Tolkien scholar. A widely respected academic named Tom Shipley was apparently on an unsanctioned German fan site interview saying on what he thinks the show could and could not explore. He was fired for that. He's no longer involved with the series, and the showrunners declined to say exactly what happened. But that, again, is touching towards he is dead set on protecting Tolkien lore. Here's what I don't think they can cover. Here's what I think they can cover. And Amazon's like, get lost, because we could cover whatever we want, and we have to cover whatever we want. Maybe he did violate an NDA. In that case, then, yeah, I can see that. But he's not the only one to be fired. Another concern, is this series going to put hobbits in the second age? In short, yes and no. One of the very specific things the text say is hobbits never did anything historic or noteworthy before the third age. But really, does it feel like Middle-earth if you don't have hobbits or hobbits in it? That says one of the showrunners, right? Yes! Hobbits don't have to be in it in order to feel like it. You're already capitulating to what audience expectations are, right?
Let's start with J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, the two showrunners that have bad reboot ties and only one IMDb credit, a bad Star Trek film, Star Trek Beyond. The Rings of Power is their first credited IMDb listing. They know it's astounding to them. We've worked on so many projects with so many awesome and exciting people that never got made, or worked on things that did get made and we didn't get any credit, says McKay. We were a little bit of a dark horse, and Amazon talked to absolutely everybody, whoever had an idea for The Lord of the Rings, adds Payne. We were passionate about the material and had a take that matched Amazon's appetite and ambitions. They also apparently had a significant champion in Jar Jar Abrams, who knew them from their writing on a bad Star Trek movie and reportedly sang their praises. Just in case you're new to the channel, I'm not the biggest fan of the creative works of the destroyer of franchises, Jar Jar Abrams, the man who gave us Screaming Spock, the man who killed Han Solo, and the man who decided not to put Han, Luke, and Leia together in a scene and keep Luke out of the movie altogether. Halbrand, a new character who is a fugitive of his own past because, again, Tolkien didn't create enough characters. They needed to create new ones because they are going to improve on Tolkien. Listen to this. The driving question behind the production, McKay adds, was this: can we come up with the novel Tolkien never wrote and do it as the mega event series that could only happen now? Oh, and as far as Tom Shippey being involved, and if you don't know who he is the foremost Tolkien scholar. Well, yes, he was initially involved with the series until this. Tom Shippey gave an apparently unsanctioned interview to a German fan site that July, opining on what the show can and cannot explore. Not long after that, Shippey was no longer involved with the series. You're not going to endear yourself to a lot of Tolkien fans when you do Tom Shippey dirty. Will it sound like Lord of the Rings? Well, they mention that they cannot use any dialogue, which I had brought up before, but then we hear the key word from a bad reboot disciple. In studying the languages from the 3 episodes Amazon let Vanity Fair screen, we found a mix of cleverly repurposed lines of Tolkien's dialogue as well as a few snatches of biblical text. Then Payne, one of the showrunners, goes on to say, well, I studied Shakespeare at Yale. Who's in the writer's room for Lord of the Rings? Well, Jason Cahill from Fringe, a bad reboot production, and Halt and Catch Fire, which I didn't see. Stephanie Folsom from Thor Ragnarok. Justin Doble from Stranger Things, which hasn't been good since season 1. Jennifer Hutchinson from Breaking Bad, which is an absolutely brilliant show, but I'm not sure how Breaking Bad writing translates into Tolkien. Helen Shang from Hannibal, which was a good show, and Glennis Mullins from Star Trek Discovery. So there's a Star Trek Discovery writer, which should be a red flag enough. They're going to repurpose Tolkien's dialogue and repurpose his characters.
Today, we're going to be discussing how, ever since the firing of Tom Shippey from the show, the world's leading Tolkien expert, Amazon Studios refuses to name any of the experts working on their show. Let's use air quotes around that, experts. Because if you're not willing to share the names of these people, but you keep touting them as the reason for why your show is going to be so good, because we've worked with the world's leading experts, the world's leading Tolkien scholars on our show, but you won't tell us who they are, that is sus as hell. There was a leak in 2019 that, however innocuous seemed, worried some of those watching from afar. The show's resident Tolkien scholar, a widely respected academic named Tom Shippey, gave an apparently unsanctioned interview to a German fan site in July, opining on what the show could and could not explore. Not long after that, Shippey was no longer involved with the series. Both he and the showrunners declined to say what actually happened, but the obvious assumption was made by fans. Drought, a Tolkien professor, goes on to say, it seems like the NDA for Amazon is basically, if you tell anyone, we're going to put you through the wood chipper. And this is where the article says, Amazon no longer shares the names of its scholars, which is the part that boggles my mind, because you would think if you're trying to earn the trust of the community and to prove to people that you are, in fact, doing right by Tolkien's work, you would have the world's most renowned Tolkien scholars backing you up and showing off their credentials to prove that you actually are working with the people who know best. But you fired the world's best, and you won't show us who else you got, which makes me think that you don't actually got nobody. Like, you've got people with opinions at this point who aren't actually scholars, and you're not willing to share their pedigree with us because they don't have a pedigree. And of course, that's my opinion, but I think it's valid. Let me know what you think in the comments below, everybody. One of the reasons that I was so hyped up about the show when it first became news years ago was the fact that we had pedigree like John Howe and Tom Shippey, who had worked with Peter Jackson on his films. Like, Shippey was actually hired, as I recall, on Peter Jackson's films to come in and teach the cast and help with the pronunciation of the Elven languages. So this is not some dude off the street. This is an 80-year-old man who is the world's leading expert. Why would you fire him? You can actually dig into his wiki, look at all the stuff he's been involved in over the years. One of his better books being J.R.R. Tolkien, author of the century. So it's just, if you're into Tolkien, this is the guy you go to. Why would you fire him from your show? Just because he made an accidental, maybe he gave an opinion, from what everyone says, he gave an opinion on a German talk show about what the Rings of Power showrunners could and couldn't talk, or could and couldn't touch in the Rings of Power show, and that pissed off some people at Amazon, and so they gave him the boot. Nobody's talking. That's how NDAs work, but it is what it is at this point.
Look at this ratio. 99,000 upvotes to 107,000 downvotes. It has been officially ratioed. The fans have spoken up. We all know the quotes that have flooded it, the Tolkien quotes that have flooded the comments section. And not only this one, but also in the UK version of the trailer, which has been ratioed for a long time, officially double the amount of dislikes as likes. But it's not just this trailer. Anything that Amazon puts out that's related to Lord of the Rings gets fucking ratioed. We talked about this. They were so embarrassed they unlisted it. 3.2 thousand to not even 100 upvotes. This has been ratioed. This little fan reaction, teaser fan reaction, ratioed to hell. Even IGN put out this video with this Tolkien expert, right? The Professor Tolkien, I believe is what he goes by, who he was coping so hard on Twitter that he said, I don't understand why all of you care so much about canon. The guy who calls himself the Tolkien Professor, who's supposedly an expert in this, comes to IGN, gets fucking ratioed. The fans have had enough of this. And we knew in the very first article they put out in Vanity Fair, when they spent time addressing the backlash, and they blamed it all on racism. They blamed it all on bigotry. They attacked the fans from the start. And like I said, they've used the OneRing.net to go after fans. The One Ring, the people from the OneRing.net were partners with Amazon in this watch party, in this premiere. They're working with them to maintain this access, to maintain all this insider information, to stay close to the creation of what's going on with the Rings of Power. The OneRing.net absolutely is on their side. And if you can't see that, I don't know what to tell you. The main trailer for Lord of the Rings, that is nearly 30 million views, has been ratioed by the real fans, the Tolkien fans who are tired of what Amazon is doing. This disaster is going to continue because Amazon they're in it for the long haul. We still have, 6-7 months until this releases on the anniversary of Tolkien's death? That's pretty apt, isn't it? Tells you a lot where Amazon's thinking. On the date, the anniversary of J.R.R. Tolkien's death is when they're releasing Rings of Power.
But of course, this Tolkien scholar cannot take criticism on social media. She currently has her Twitter account protected, so you can't see anything that she's saying behind the wall. But there are a lot of screenshots of things that she said over the past few months, even tweets where she has completely disregarded Tolkien's work. Now, here is one of the many tweets that she's made. It's only from February 11th. It says, "It's okay, we're in this together, and I would not change a single word of that article for the world. Thank you for giving us a platform. You're doing the Lord's work. Racists can complain all they want. Ismael Cruz will still be an elf, and he looks damn fine as one." Of course, instantly saying, oh, if people do not like the fact that there is a black elf in the show, even though it doesn't follow the source material, you're instantly an ist, which is absolutely disgusting. Here is another tweet that she had made. She had said, "Respecting my idea of Tolkien, which may also be a racist, fascist, white supremacist idea. Have y'all talked to the man to know what he thinks about your respect? Have you talked to the man about how he would feel that you are completely disregarding all of the work that he made?" No, of course not, because she said you need a Ouija board. She is being so disrespectful to people who love his work, to people who are simply disagreeing with the decisions Amazon's making and the criticisms that we're putting forward. Now, just because my opinions, whether they're about Tolkien's work or politics, are different, doesn't mean I instantly want them off a project. But when they get to make decisions that do impact the content we get, I'm going to criticize them. Criticism is different than attacking someone. I'm not sitting here calling for them to be canceled or fired off of the project, but I think some of the statements they've made are absurd. They even tried to make a tweet about Gollum, saying, "Hobbit musing of the day. In The Hobbit, Gollum is described as dark as darkness. What is this supposed to mean?" And yes, I am wondering here about the limits between the metaphorical and the racial. I don't think that they've ever actually read his work, because as you can see in another series of tweets that was made, his skin was white, no doubt with a pallor increased by dwelling long in the dark and later by hunger. Clearly, Gollum's skin is supposed to be white. He is supposed to be as pale as snow, basically. And they're going on about how maybe it's metaphorical, but maybe it's racial. This is the Tolkien scholar for the Rings of Power show. This is who they chose to make potential decisions, or at least to influence the people that are writing this series. This is absolutely ridiculous. If they were a real Tolkien scholar and actually cared about his work, they wouldn't want it changed. Amazon and these writers are disrespecting his legacy and his work by changing this much around. And a real Tolkien lover would never be okay with that at all whatsoever.
Also, there was an interesting quote that I thought was funny. Can we come up with a novel Tolkien never wrote and do it as the mega event series that could only happen now? Yes, because Tolkien's son finally retired, so you could get your filthy little mitts on Let It Go. Any rational person would say, no, you can't. If you could come up with something on the level of Tolkien's work, you wouldn't need Tolkien's work to bounce your new scary great ideas off of. This is a $1 billion fan fiction.
Can we come up with the novel Tolkien never wrote? No, but they did have issues with one of the Tolkien scholars. It says, the production canned Tolkien scholar Tom Shippey. It's unclear why he was canned. Vanity Fair suggested that it was over an NDA breach, claiming that he gave an apparently unsanctioned interview to a German fan site that July, opining on what the show could and could not explore. Not long after that, Shippey was no longer with the series. This was a guy who loved the lore so much he just went round fan sites talking about it. And yet, he got fired for it. Why? Because he was letting the cat out of the bag, at least according to Vanity Fair. He was talking about what they didn't have the rights to and Amazon didn't want people to know. Why? Well, it may well destroy the hype when people find out that you're making a Lord of the Rings show which isn't based on Lord of the Rings. And that is why they changed the core fundamentals, because they wanted to write the book that Tolkien never did. Because they think they have a superior message, that they have a superior talent to him. So they don't care about changing the 2%, because their 98% they think is better than anything he could have done anyway. Tolkien didn't represent the world. Tolkien didn't add all of this extra modernization into his books, but they have. And to them, that makes them superior. That makes them better and more talented, because it's not about the quality of what you're saying. It's about the message that you happen to be pushing. That's what they care about. That is what Amazon cares about. And nothing makes it more clear than all of the shows they ever put out.
They think that they can write the story that Tolkien never wrote, but you cannot wield it. None of us can. The Lord of the Rings belongs to Tolkien alone. It has no other master. If you actually wanted to do that, if you had the budget of $1 billion, why not actually create the story that Tolkien never wrote by writing your own story?
You can see, pictures of Galadriel and Elrond that should make you second guess what the series is going to be all about. The day Christopher Tolkien died, they made casting decisions and retooled the show entirely. Another Brown M&M test that should let you know exactly what they think about the source material. I don't want to give attention. I don't want to hype up the show. I don't want people to watch something that craps all over the life's work of somebody who I deeply admire. People who would recast the show the day that Christopher Tolkien died and could no longer tell him no. Let you know pretty much everything you need to know about what's going on. And why it was delayed is because they decided to remake the show really to spite him.
And we're also going to have a few more months of spin from the Access Media like this from the IGN Tolkien expert.
What's the deal with everyone saying that dwarven women are meant to have beards? Is that from the books?
No, Tolkien never says dwarven women have beards.
Except, of course, when he did say it, and it was published in the War of the Jewels, and Amazon and other parties are trying their best to erase that from the internet right now.
Numenor is on the equator. So when we meet the Numenorians, in theory, they will have been a culture living on the equator for thousands of years. I see no reason to think, based, from Tolkien's story, that they should be Viking-looking white folks.
Sorry to disagree with IGN's Tolkien expert, and a quick reminder, I am no expert, I am no scholar, but I do know that Middle-earth was flat until the fall of Numenor and the bending of the world, so it wasn't on the equator, and no, it wouldn't have gotten as much sunlight, and yes, there was a sun. And of course, I'm going to bring up that the Tolkien expert, with his argument about Numenorians living towards the equator and not necessarily being white, just contradicted his argument about black dwarves who live in caves.
What happened the last time someone made up a forbidden romance that wasn't in the real story? Oh, that's right, it sucked. Tariel and Killy's romance added nothing to the plot, story, or themes, and proved Tariel was a cool but pointless character who didn't need to be in the film. It's arrogant to come in and just change someone's story because you'd rather tell something else. And the showrunners have that arrogance in spades. Quote, "The driving question behind the production," McKay adds, "was this. Can we come up with the novel Tolkien never wrote and do it as a mega event series that could only happen now? No and no. How do I know? 1, because Tolkien did write it, it's called The Silmarillion. 2, Princess Doritos. That's a dwarf. Oh yeah, that's a dwarf. Specifically a dwarf princess from Moria. Tolkien based the dwarves on Norse folklore. He even got the names of the ones mentioned in The Hobbit from the Poetic Edda, a Norse epic poem, which also mentions Gandalf and even Oakenshield. Tolkien never describes the dwarves as looking anything remotely close to African, nor does it make sense that they would look that way since they all live underground, meaning out of the sunlight. They would never get this dark. Dwarf women have beards. They look so much like the men that other races think there are no dwarf women. This is basic to the lore. So to leave that out tells us everything we need to know about the showrunners' respect for Tolkien's work. They seem to show so little respect for it that they got rid of people who did. The article mentions Tom Shippey getting canned by Amazon shortly after he gave an unapproved interview stating what the showrunners could and couldn't do. Shippey has talked about Tolkien's work for longer than I've been alive, so to boot him, even for breaking an NDA but not revealing anything about the production, says quite a bit about what's going on with the series. Vanity Fair mentions that Amazon was tight-lipped until now, and they won't share the names of other Tolkien scholars they're talking to. Based on what's happened and what's been revealed, that makes me suspicious. I think they're going for the revisionist scholars instead of the purists like Shippey, trying to find people who will validate their changes. I also think this is why they hid the details about the show for so long. They knew it wouldn't go over well with fans, but they're so committed to their revisions that they thought they could just dump it in chunks and people would like it. Nope. They got destroyed on social media and in the press over their changes, especially about the beardless dwarf. IGN had Corey Olsen, the Tolkien professor, react to Amazon's teaser trailer for The Rings of Power.
The story that we know from Tolkien's materials in the Second Age, again, it's very limited. He never wrote the story of the Second Age. It doesn't exist in Tolkien's writings.
Yes, he did. Twice. Once in the Silmarillion, and once in the appendices of The Return of the King. These weren't full-on dialogue-heavy narratives, but they are stories. I don't know why people keep claiming that they aren't. A story doesn't have to be a 1,600-page standalone novel. It can be a couple of dozen pages long. These still count as stories in the same way that grim fairy tales count as stories.
Especially people who know and love the Peter Jackson films have this indelible image of the incredibly regal and elegant Cate Blanchett in her flowing white dress, speaking slowly and in mysterious tones, right, to Frodo. And so the idea of a Galadriel who's jumping around and hanging by her fancy dagger from the ice, wearing chainmail, riding a horse into battle apparently at the head of a squad, it seems jarring. It's my favorite part.
Of course it is. Never mind that the regal, ethereal Galadriel comes from Tolkien's descriptions, not from Peter Jackson. What you see in the films was mostly lifted from the books. Cate Blanchett nails this role, making Galadriel feel ancient and powerful beyond reckoning. The moment you see her, you know she's not to be messed with. With a single look, Blanchett conveys that Galadriel is compassionate and yet so mighty that even a Balrog wouldn't dare challenge her. She did this with a look. No knife, no armor, just a casual glance. You don't have to put a sword in her hand to make her strong. That's also clear in the book. So right there, you're showing that you need to reread them. Because you're a little off, but not as off as this.
And here's why people underestimate is how much younger Galadriel was. A lot of people have this idea that elves are frozen. That was not Tolkien's idea of elves at all. Last September was published a book, The Nature of Middle-earth. One of the things that he does a lot of in this book is he talks about elvish ages. He calculates the exact age of Galadriel, like her maturity level. In the end, decides that at the beginning of the Second Age, in other words, right around where this series is taking place, Galadriel is the mortal equivalent of 21.
Olsen is right that Tolkien says she's about 20 or 2,880 solar years old when she arrives to Middle-earth. The problem is that she comes to Middle-earth at the beginning of the first stage, not the second, which is when the show is set. It's amazing that you have the book in your hand and still got this wrong. Speaking of wrong,
Tolkien gave very little in the way of physical description. We actually know very little about even central characters. What color is Mary's hair? No idea. He never says.
But before the king could speak, the small smoke-breathing figure suddenly became aware of them as they sat there silent on the edge of the mist. He sprang to his feet. A young man he looked, or like one, though not much more than half a man in height. His head of brown curly hair was uncovered, but he was clad in the travel-stained cloak of the same hue and shape as the companions of Gandalf had worn when they rode to Edoras. He bowed very low, putting his hand upon his breast. Then, seeming not to observe the wizard and his friends, he turned to Eomer and the king. "Welcome, my lords, to Isengard," he said. "We are the Door Wardens. Meriadoc, son of Saradoc, is my name. The Two Towers, Book 3, Chapter 8, The Road to Isengard. Would you like to try again?"
Tolkien never even mentioned whether or not Aragorn has a beard.
This is true, but a very weird point to make. You're claiming that Tolkien doesn't tell us what characters look like, and you use Aragorn as an example, except Tolkien does describe him. Quote, "As Frodo drew near, he drew back his hood, showing a shaggy head of dark hair flecked with gray, and in a pale, stern face, a pair of keen gray eyes." So why are you focusing on the beard? Just because Tolkien doesn't mention whether Aragorn had a beard doesn't make his description not a description.
If somebody asked me the question, do I believe that Tolkien pictured most or all of these characters as light-skinned? I think that in his mind's eye, yes, he was picturing them as white.
If Tolkien's intentions were clear enough for you, who's about to contradict yourself, to get that these characters are white, then that should be the end of the discussion about the racial depiction of the characters. We all know that these characters are based on Europeans. There's no reason to pretend that they're not when Tolkien was very clear about his inspirations. All these races, from the elves to the men to the dwarves, are white, and there's nothing wrong with that, and no need to change it. Tolkien has the Easterlings and the Harad, who could be depicted as non-white, and since the Númenóreans sailed east constantly, it would make sense that they would encounter these people. Those could be the non-white cast in the show that you're looking for. But I'm sure you're going to come up with some nonsense that's so ridiculously wrong that Christopher Lee will slap you from his grave.
When he was doing his maps, for instance, he said things like, so Minas Tirith is about the latitude of central Italy, and Umbar, the city down in the south where the Southrons come from, is about the latitude of Carthage. So that means that Dol Amroth down on the southern shore of Gondor would have been about the latitude of like Morocco, southern Spain, perhaps. Do you want to be true to what you think Tolkien was probably imagining? Or do you want to be true to what Tolkien said about the world?
Do you mean this? Quote, "As for the shape of the world of the Third Age, I am afraid that was devised dramatically rather than geologically or paleontologically." Or maybe this, quote, "If Hobbiton and Rivendell are taken, as intended, to be at about the latitude of Oxford, then Minas Tirith, 600 miles south, is about the latitude of Florence. The mouths of Anduin and the ancient city of Peлагir are about at the latitude of ancient Troy." Or mayhap this, quote, "Those days, the Third Age of Middle-earth, are now long past, and the shape of all lands has been changed." Are those what you mean? Because it seems like Tolkien is saying, don't assume the lands of Arda are one-for-one analogs for the lands of the actual Earth. I mean, that's what he said about the world, and you're all about listening to what he said. So are you going to listen to him?
Numenor is on the equator.
So that's a no.
So when we meet the Numenorians, in theory, they will have been a culture living on the equator for thousands of years. I see no reason to think, based, from Tolkien's story, that they should be Viking-looking white folks.
This is a map of Arda. As you can see, it remained flat until the fall of Numenor at the end of the Second Age. If the world was flat, there was no equator. Numenor, as you can see, was flooded when Arda was made round, so it was gone when Iluvatar created an equator. So you are wrong, sir. Twice, because Tolkien stated that the Numenorians were descendants of the Edain. As you admitted, Tolkien likely imagined all these men were white, so when they moved to Numenor, they'd still be white. Their race wouldn't magically change because they went to a hotter climate. This is further proved by their long lifespan. Numenorians could live between 300 to 400 years at their prime, so the chances of them changing due to the climate would be much smaller, and they were initially less likely to mingle with other races of men. The clearest evidence of this is Aragorn, Faramir, and Boromir, all of whom have connections to the Numenorians. They are all white. Now, Tolkien did consider making Arda round from the start in later writings, but he seems to have abandoned this and returned to the flat world theory. So your point is defied by what Tolkien actually wrote and the real world, where Europeans have moved to lands near the equator, like northern Brazil, and didn't change their race. They just got tanned. So that point you're trying to make about location and brown people, it's wrong.
I've seen a lot of people asking, and even some complaining, that Elrond doesn't have long flowing elvish hair. What's up with that?
No, it's a Peter Jackson thing. We don't know anything about elf hair. Again, we know something about the color of some of the elves' hair, but we know literally nothing about how long there's no reason to think that elves had long hair. There's no reason to think they had short hair either. But that is totally not a book detail. That is absolutely a movie thing.
You're right, because there totally isn't decades of art from before 2001 showing elves with long hair. Oh, wait, there is. Seems like lots of people assumed elves would have long hair because some of them, like Galadriel, were described as having long hair, and it's a common fantasy trope, not something Peter Jackson created.
What's the deal with everyone saying that dwarven women are meant to have beards? Is that from the books?
No.
Dís was a daughter of Thrain II. She is the only dwarf woman named in these histories. It was said by Gimli that there are few dwarf women, probably no more than a third of the whole people. They seldom walk abroad, except at great need. They are in voice and appearance, and in garb if they must go on a journey, so like to the dwarf men that the eyes and ears of other peoples cannot tell them apart. This has given rise to the foolish opinion among men that there are no dwarf women, and that the dwarves grow out of stone. The Return of the King, Appendices A, Durin's folk. How are you this wrong? No, better question. How much did Amazon pay you to be this wrong?
Tolkien never says dwarven women have beards. He says they rarely wander around, and when they do, they're often mistaken for dwarven men, meaning like they keep to themselves and like you don't know that it's a woman. That they have beards is not in the text. It's a joke that Peter Jackson made and everybody loved.
Right. Dwarf women don't have beards and rarely go out, but when they do, they get mistaken for men because people don't know they're women. Why would they be mistaken for men? Tolkien describes how dwarves dress. They don't cover their faces because they're very proud of their beards. So if dwarf women don't have beards and they dress like the men, meaning they wouldn't cover their faces, wouldn't people see that the women don't have beards? Even if they sound like the men, wouldn't people notice this and ask about it, making the myth that there are no dwarf women pointless? Why lie and claim Tolkien never wrote about this? This is such a petty thing to lie about, and yet here you are doing just that, just lying for no good reason.